Good morning and welcome to OSW Daily, where each day we discuss the trending topics related to work with industry experts and thought leaders, and today's no exception. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, we're going to talk about cognitive performance, and we have a very special guest who I think is perfect to actually discuss this thing. So this is your first time coming across the channel. Please, thank you. I hope you find this valuable. I hope you find this useful. And if you have any questions for Andrew, who we're going to chat with during the session, then please do write them in the comment section of whatever platform you're watching this in. So who am I? My name is Steve Todd. I'm Global Head of Workplace at NASDAQ, and I'm also the founder of opensourceworkplace.com. As I said, so thank you for joining us today. And what are we going to talk about today? Let's pull up today's agenda. Today we're going to talk about leadership model for a virtualized world. What does that look like? Again, cognitive performance, as I mentioned before, and the brain is wired for safety. How does this get impacted in a world where vaccine news is just being released to us? And today, as I said, I mentioned our thought leader is Mr. Andrew Mawson, who is the owner of Advanced Workplace Associates. And I'm really looking forward to digging into this with Andrew. So Andrew, welcome to OSW Daily. How are you doing?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I'm doing well, thank you. I'm doing well. Thanks for inviting me onto your show for the first time. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, no, this is your first time in OSW Daily. We've done many interviews over the last 6 months, and it's really good to have you back. And I look forward to digging into you. But Andrew, what should the audience know about Mr. Andrew Mawson?
Well, I'm a bit of a strange hybrid. The word hybrid seems to be in fashion at the moment, but I'm a strange hybrid beast. I trained initially as a statistician. I went into the IT and the defense industry, mostly in quality management and change management, logistics, all sorts of stuff. And then eventually stumbled across a thing called intelligent buildings. And after a research program around that from within the IT industry, I then got involved in setting up AWA and doing all the things that we do today. So most of what we do today, Steve, is help organizations and individuals look at the future and try and work out what their work arrangements need to be in order to help them do what they need to do, and then help them make that shift. So we're sort of, people would describe it as a workplace change management consultancy, and we do stuff all over the world with some really cool companies, and particularly now, and the world, that we now inherit as we see it moving forward is the world that we kind of envisaged back in 1991 when we set the business up. So it's a fascinating time to be involved in all this stuff.
So, I mean, you must have seen a lot of changes in the last 12 months. Maybe the same questions, but maybe the answers are a little bit different. So how have you seen that shift, and what sort of things are people looking at today?
Well, I think we were always on a trend towards greater levels of flexibility and mobility. Technology's been reducing in price consistently over a long period of time, and certainly in all the studies that we've been doing with various different clients, we've seen an increasing number of people wanting a greater level of flexibility. So that trend has been in play for some time, but I think a lot of the time people were asking for that. They were doing so without necessarily having a real experience of it. Now what we're seeing is, surveys, not just ours, but from many different sources, just reinforcing the point that people are looking for greater levels of flexibility, but at the same time, they do want the ability to be together some of the time. So, I think what we're talking about, the only thing to be imposed here is choice to some degree. And it's a question really of organizations embracing that idea, I think, and using it to help them to be better than they are today. There are so many different dimensions to what you can squeeze out of the idea of mobility. It's really a question of looking at each organization and trying and get under the bonnet of their specific drivers and needs and tensions, and seeing how you can use mobility and changes in the way people work as a competitive tool. So yeah, it's a fascinating time, and just a trend that's been going on, I think.
Yeah, and you did mention about people wanting to come together some of the time, right? And employees are searching for belonging, social connection, right? And especially during this time, as you mentioned, do leaders need to build a culture that promotes community engagement then to allow that social interaction to take place?
Well, it's interesting. We did right at the beginning of the lockdown period. We redid a piece of research we'd done about 5 years ago, which is called Managing the Agile Workplace. And basically what it did, it brought forward 6 factors that make a difference to the performance of knowledge-based communities. But there are a couple of 3 of those that are particularly come under pressure when you're working away, and those are the things that matter a lot. So the number one factor, whether we're working at home or anywhere else, is social cohesion with knowledge-based communities. And the reason why that is so important is because social cohesion is one of the factors that gives rise to what we call psychological safety, the ability for people to feel comfortable in their boots, to be able to share, to be able to challenge each other without feeling bruised. It's the kind of lubricant, if you like, to help organizations and people get on and make things happen and get the most out of their collective knowledge. And of course, when we're working in the office, notionally, the romantic theory was that in fact it was very good, we could get this very easily. I mean, the truth is that I think something else was going on. If you actually asked how many people knew in the workplace, it's actually not that many know well. So, but now that we're working away, it comes under more stress because we're not seeing each other. We're not picking up quite as many signals about each other. And you can see very clearly there are some leaders that are really doing well in this whole period. The kind of leaders that were very socially connected to their people, they knew them quite well, they stimulated greater levels of openness and creativity. And there were other managers and leaders who are very much looking down and focused on their bit and not so much worrying about other people. And I think the research basically reinforces this. We're looking, in order to operate effectively in a virtualized model or a hybrid virtualized model, we need leaders to be much more transformative in their approach to leadership and not so much supervisory. And we're seeing that now, in the experiences people are feeling day to day. And so what you've got to do really is you've got to get your best leader, and you've got to say, well, what is it about that leader that makes him the best or her the best? And how can we take every leader and every manager in our organization and teach them how to be as good as that? And so for some people it'll come naturally. For other people it's going to require a bit of work, but it's the only way it's going to really work. So some interesting things.
Is that best leader different, do you think, in the virtual world as it is to the real world?
No, I don't think so, Steve. I think I think people watching and listening would probably recognize there were certain people around them, certain leaders and managers who were particularly good. They were good in the old world, they were good in the new world. But the people who weren't so good in the old world will find it more difficult in the new world because they could kind of get away with stuff because people came in and stuff happened. But I don't think you can get away with it in the new world. And of course, as time has moved on, through this pandemic, the difference between the good leader and the not so good leader will become much more obvious, I think. It's an upskilling for everybody, I think.
That's interesting. And then on your last point here on this slide, social cohesion and trust are vital ingredients that you just mentioned, like to create a productive workforce. Yet in the coming months, there's a cocktail of circumstances that will put this under pressure. What's the cocktail of circumstances you're referencing?
Well, I mean, there are, we can see already this idea of the sort of people are talking about the hybrid model. Now, for me, this is potentially a problem because I don't think we want a hybrid model, and that sounds a bit strange, I think. But if you bear with me for a second, the notion that we have some people in the office and they work in a certain way, and they are all connected and they're socially connected, and the rest of us are, in some way, dispersed and not connected, is not a world that we want. We want one world, and we want one culture, and we want one set of practices and processes, behaviors, and an infrastructure and technology. But then when we have all that and everybody's on the same playing field, we can then choose to work together physically when we need to, and we can get value from that. And so that's one of the things, this idea that we've got the us and them thing, which we just absolutely want to get rid of. And then we've got people maybe who have been furloughed. They've been paid by the government to sit at home while the other guys and girls have been working really hard during this period. And at some point, they're going to come back in to the office or into the organization, and they're going to be feeling a bit insecure because they were the people who were kind of let go a bit, and the others will be feeling a little bit uncomfortable because they've been, as far as they can see it, the other people have been having a jolly good holiday on the government for a little while. And then you add in this sort of hybrid things, and all these things kind of have a potential to create division, if you like. And I think, for me, what leaders now need to do is recognize that that is the world that they're sort of heading towards. And if they aren't very good at, creating this kind of communal feeling and friendship, trust, and all the rest of it, they've got to work at it, and they've got to think hard about it. So those are sort of things that I think, become divisive.
So I mean, the point that that's just stuck with me was the fact that hybrid you don't believe is going to work in the long term. So do you think organizations have to decide we're going to be office first or we're going to be virtual first, and that's basically how their processes, how they have to operate going forward?
My sense is that all organizations at some point are going to have to get their heads around the idea of creating infrastructure, culture, behaviors, and everything that allow their people to work anywhere. It's not a question of home or office, but work in the same way anywhere. And if you get to that point, I think you're on the way to what we'll call virtualizing your enterprise. And by that I don't mean just the location, but things like, how do we bring new people into an organization that is where everybody's not in the same physical space all the time? How do we enhance and generate and create high levels of competence very quickly? How do we connect people into new networks? How do we recruit in this new world so that we can take advantage of recruiting people who want to live in other places, or we might choose from other places? So it's not this isn't really just about working in the home or working in the office. This is about actually creating an infrastructure, culture, practices, processes that enable us all to work anywhere. Because when we get to that point, it seems to me we've gone beyond this kind of us and them thing, and we've actually created an organization that is both, solid, capable of rapid change, and also on top of that, obviously can recruit and retain the best talent from wherever it is. So, I think it's a win-win-win for everybody, but you have to kind of see that end state vision, and then orchestrate everything to kind of get there, I think.
No, that's interesting, really interesting. So, I mean, we talked about, many aspects there, but if you think about that social cohesion, you think about that sense of belonging. How does that impact performance?
Well, at the individual level, I mean, I think, there's two different bits to this, and it's interesting to think about them. I mean, there's the individual. It's a bit like, I know you and I have talked about soccer for quite a bit. I mean, it's about the individual. How do we get the best out of the individual? How do we get them to do the right things that enable them to be the best they can be? But then, in the world of knowledge work, no man's an island. So, how do we get the most out of collections of individuals and individual brains? And the social cohesion component, I think, works in two ways. One is it's quite clear that people who work with other people who they get on with, and they're not prickly with, and they're not worried about, consume less cognitive bandwidth than people who, for yourself. I mean, if you're around people you're worried about, or you're constantly getting poked by, or they're powerful and they have some influence on your future, then you're potentially a little bit more guarded, a little bit more careful. You're thinking much more about how you handle what you say. You're not free. You're not free to speak openly. So it consumes that. But the other part of it, which as I mentioned before, is as a collective, we want to create the conditions under which people are generous with their knowledge. where they're helping each other out, where they're kind of finishing each other's sentences, where, and this isn't just within a team, but teams of teams. My perfect view of the world is that you have teams who are, socially connected and comfortable with each other, just as you do, individuals. And if you get to that point, you're allowing the free flow of knowledge and information, and you're creating the conditions under which creativity is possible, because people feel that they can challenge each other constructively and sensitively to come forward with new ideas, new innovations, in a way that perhaps if they were not socially cohesive, they simply wouldn't be able to do that. They would be guarded. I mean, I see it in some of the organisations we work with. People are worried to say the truth. They're worried to expose the elephant in the room. And it's a constraining factor, and it certainly doesn't help with creativity and people feeling they can get on. So that's how this sort of social cohesion plays.
Yeah.
In the concept.
And you touched on performance, and one of the things that I really want to dig in with you is cognitive performance. So why should organizations care about cognitive performance?
Well, in the end, organizations for me are the collection, the aggregation of brain power that they have on the payroll. It doesn't sit on the balance sheet, interestingly. But if you think about it, it's an organization is just, many hundreds, many thousands of people who come to work each day to do some stuff. And basically, you're buying brains and you're buying energy. And so if you're buying brains, then it seems to me you want every brain to be on top performance. And if you get that, you're getting the maximum out of the brain power that you're hiring. And so companies should be interested in that, because in the end of the day, that's what you're buying. You're buying energy and brains. And so, you imagine it as, think about going somewhere like the Albert Hall or something and giving everybody a torch. And, you want to, you've got some torches that are not very well lit. Some of them are very strong. They've got very strong batteries. Some of them are pointing over here. Some of them are pointing over there. What you want all of those torches to be on full strength all the time, and you want them pointed at the things that you want to do. You get real focus and energy on them. So this is why I think cognitive performance is so important, because it's you're buying the brain. You've got to get the most out of each brain, really, and each community. And so this is why this interplay between the individual brain and the collective brain is so important, I think.
Yeah. And I went through some of the factors there that you note, and the one that sort of stuck out to me was the negative on task interruption. And many of the conversations I'm having these days, where I'm asking people, are you more productive at home, or are you more productive in the office? And those that say at home, one of the key reasons that they think they're more productive and feel they're more productive at home is because there's less task interruption.
And that's entirely right. And if, of course, in the the chart that you put up there, the research we've done around this indicates that you look at the world in two ways around cognitive performance. One is you want to get people to do the right things so that their brains are in the best shape they can be. So hydration, nutrition, sleep, exercise all matter hugely. But then on the other side of the coin, you want to create the conditions under which the brain can then focus, so that it doesn't have to, filter out, trade out things in its vision. And what I think we established through our research was that visual and audible distractions, do consume cognitive bandwidth, and as a consequence of that, really. You can start to see exactly why people are responding to these surveys in the way that they are doing about working at home, because in a lot of cases, not all cases, but a lot of cases, people are able to focus. We're almost giving them their own office, to be perfectly honest, in a way that they can't back in the office. And it's becoming obvious. I think the other thing that's interesting about this time is this need and this this ability and the link between their perceived personal productivity and distraction has become much more visible than to most people than it was before. So so that's really the at the heart of it, I think, Steve.
Mm,
People are able to focus now in a way that they weren't. Now, interestingly, we're doing quite a lot of work with a very big law firm, and we have partners saying, well, that's all very well, but that's only part of the job. And by the way, there was value in having interruptions because particularly we were we as partners were helping to guide these people who were possibly going off in the wrong direction and all this sort of business. So you hear different sides of this story from different people, but I think you know there's no doubt in the world of knowledge work, um, you know, a large proportion of the time people are working, they are doing stuff which is requiring focus. They're working on their own, doing something, developing something, thinking something through, developing an idea or something, which then they share with colleagues, who then add more value. And those, so that you've got this kind of combination between the individual's performance and the individual's work, and then the team. And so it's vital that both components of this are dealt with. But I think that's certainly the background to that whole thing.
yeah, and it's interesting you went the other way as well because the other thing I'm hearing, yes, the task interruption is one of the things that really impacts productivity, but one of the social
Mm,
interaction elements that people love about the office is the fact that they
mm,
can interrupt, they can tap somebody in the shoulder, they can look over
yeah.
someone else's shoulder and get an answer instantly. So it kind of is a tough thing to balance. One thing I want
Mm,
to I just ask you about, you note speech as a negative there. What do you mean by
mhm.
that?
Well, speech, really, it's anything that carries value. So, speech in particular is very distracting because, particularly speech which, if somebody's talking about something that is um, relevant to you, you will tend to pay attention to it.
Hmm.
You're if it's something, if it's just a bit of background music, which is really not very taxing and it's just in the wash, it doesn't have so much impact. But if it's something that there's a bang or there's some noise that is uh, you know related to something you like or know about or something, your brain tunes into it. And what we know is that when you've been distracted, particularly when you've been in a state of deep concentration, it takes some more time to get back into the same state of concentration. And so that's how that's what we meant by noise and
Yeah, no,
speech.
it's funny. It's interesting that you're talking about that. I'm thinking about a lorry backing up. I don't know why. and,
So the fact is here, that's
and I'm
why.
sure. I wonder how many other people actually listen to you going, that's a lorry backing up. I'm sure it is. You know what I mean? Just
Well,
right the timing.
the interesting thing about that, Steve, is I can't really hear it as well as you can because this microphone is magnifying the sound, and you're getting a worse experience than I am. So it's
Not
sort of
really.
interesting.
I'm listening to you, Andrew. How could I possibly get a worse experience? Come on, come on. So one of the things that we did talk about was, you mentioned the brains being wired for safety, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And
Mhm.
as we bring this up and we look at how our brains being wired for safety, there's lots of news at the moment about vaccine and the effectiveness, and
Mm,
it's fantastic news.
mm,
What impact do you think that's going to have in people's perception of their safety? We're at home, we feel safe, we're
mm.
maybe reluctant to leave our home, go back to the office. How do you think this is going to play in that safety factor?
Well, I think it should have a positive impact at some point, doesn't it? I mean, I think when in the old world, safety, both social and physical safety, was associated with doing all the things we did before, going to the office, doing all the things we did. It was it was safe. We got some money for it. It gave us some status in the world. Then we rapidly moved to the idea that the home was going to be the safe place. But of course, for some people, depending on age and health, the risk of mortality from the coronavirus is actually very, very low indeed. And you can sort of see the behavior of different tranches of our populations. Um, you know, operating very different ways. But for people who are perhaps over 55, 60 or whatever, who have been reluctant to go out, they should now feel a little more comfortable. But I suspect until they've actually had a vaccine, they will still feel like, averse to taking a risk if they can possibly get away with it. But that situation will change. But I think one of the things that has happened though through this period, particularly as by the time we finish with this, a lot of people will have been working at home probably for a year or so, is that they will have developed new rituals and new patterns and new ways of thinking, and new arrangements. And so, this idea that we're all suddenly going to spring back to the old model of working, is, I think, for most people, not going to be true. I mean, for sure, what we're in at the moment is a very extreme situation, and I know, and I'm probably one of them, who, people who want to have more social interaction. But I think the genie's out of the bottle, really. I don't think we're going to go back to a world that is exactly like the one we left a year ago.
Yeah. So, and as we just wrap up here, Andrew, what's the number one question you think leaders need to be asking themselves today?
Hmm. I think leaders need to be asking themselves what they're trying to achieve, Steve, actually. I think very often, in life and in business, we just get on and keep turning the handle day in, day out, and doing what is apparently required of us. I think now is a moment where people need to reflect and to think about what is it we're trying to do in our business? What are we trying to achieve? And actually, how can we use what we've learned through this whole saga? And how can we use this idea of virtuality, to make our businesses better, to give our people a better arrangement, and to do a better job for society, I think. Those are the things I think leaders should be thinking about right now.
No, that's great, Andrew. That's great. As I said, as we wrap it up, is there anything you want to sort of finish up on before we wrap up?
Well, the only thing I would we've been talking a lot about cognitive performance, cognitive energy. I mean, we're just about to embark upon another study, which is focused on the whole subject of cognitive capacity, which I think is actually one of the most important topics for the world going forward. Because, as I say, I think as we head into the world of knowledge work, the only tool in town is your brain, really. And at the moment, I think we're very unsophisticated in how we use brain power and nurture brain power and do that. So if anybody's interested in getting involved in that study, whilst the lorry in the background is dumping its cement load, that would be fantastic to hear from you.
That's great. That's great. So, look, Andrew, thank you. Is where can people find you today?
So if anybody wants to contact me personally, I'm on a Mawson at advanced-workplace.com. That's probably the best route to go, or come to our website, advanced-workplace.com, and just find the info at bit contact, and contact me through there.
That's great. That's great, Andrew. Thank you very much for your time. And folks, there'll be links to everything we've talked about today in the comment section below. So thank you, Andrew, and I look forward to catching up with you soon, mate. Take care.